When the transmission first reached Earth, it didn't come as a message. It came as a scream. Not from one person, but from thousands, voices overlapping, breaking through the static of deep space signals. At first, scientists thought it was an echo of an old satellite, maybe a glitch caused by cosmic interference. But when the sound repeated and the words became clear, humanity realized it wasn't a malfunction. It was a call for help. They were our children. Not metaphorically, not some poetic idea of humanity's future. They were literally our children, stolen, sold, and enslaved by something far beyond Earth's skies. The Galaxy Empire, as they called themselves, had been taking human children from colonized worlds, those small outposts we'd built on the edges of known space. We thought those colonies had gone silent because of failed systems or resource shortages, but they hadn't gone silent. They'd been silenced. For decades, the Earth Federation had turned inward, rebuilding after centuries of internal conflict. Space exploration had slowed, funding had shifted to homeworld recovery, and the outer colonies were left to fend for themselves. It was easy to forget about them, easy to believe they were fine out there, spinning around strange suns, living simple lives on alien soil. Until the screams came through. The message lasted 23 seconds before the signal collapsed into noise. Analysts worked around the clock to reconstruct what they could. Out of all that chaos, 4 words stood out clear as daylight. They are taking us. The next day, Earth changed. For the first time in a century, all 12 nations of the Federation agreed on something. They activated the Emergency Defense Protocol, the one designed for alien contact. Not peaceful diplomacy, but retaliation. Humanity had always been slow to anger, but once we had a reason, we became unstoppable. Still, nobody knew what we were up against. The first contact reports described the Galaxy Empire as impossibly advanced, a civilization that had spread across hundreds of star systems, ruled by a hierarchy of species, each one more powerful and predatory than the last. Humans to them were nothing more than a workforce, small and adaptable, easily controlled. The stolen children weren't just labor. They were experiments, trained, conditioned, reshaped to serve alien masters. But humans don't stay broken forever. Some of those children grew up. Some escaped. And one of them, her voice was the last thing we heard before the transmission cut off, promised that if Earth ever heard their cries, we wouldn't forget them. That promise burned in every human heart. We built ships again, not for exploration this time, but for war. The old orbital shipyards came alive with light and movement, humming with the sound of construction. The veterans who had fought in Earth's last great war were called back into service. Young engineers, pilots, and strategists volunteered by the millions. No one had to be told why. Every parent, every brother, every sister felt it. We weren't fighting for conquest or revenge. We were fighting because someone had taken our children, and humanity doesn't forgive that. The first fleet was named Retribution. It wasn't large by galactic standards, barely 200 ships, but every one of them was built with human stubbornness in its metal. Our technology wasn't elegant, not like the Empire's. Their ships moved like whispers of light, silent and perfect. Ours roared and shook and burned brighter than any star. When the fleet left Earth orbit, billions watched from every screen, every rooftop, every station window. There was no celebration. Only silence, and a shared understanding that something had been set in motion that could never be undone. Weeks passed in the darkness between stars. Communications went quiet to avoid detection. The only sound inside the ships was the low hum of engines and the occasional heartbeat of distant radar. Then came the first sighting, an Empire scout vessel drifting through an asteroid belt near the edge of human space. We didn't hail them. We didn't send warnings. Humanity's first message to the Empire came in the form of a rail cannon, round that tore through their ship like paper. No survivors, no mercy. That was the moment the Empire learned we were coming. At first, they didn't take us seriously. Reports from intercepted transmissions suggested they thought humans were primitives, barely beyond our own star. But as the first skirmishes began, that arrogance started to fade. Every battle left marks on both sides. We learned fast. We adapted faster. And the thing that terrified them most wasn't our technology. It was our will. They had enslaved hundreds of species across the galaxy. None had ever fought back like this. None had ever returned fire with such fury, such precision. Humanity was smaller, weaker, and newer to the stars, but we had something they didn't understand: each other. We fought not for empire, not for power, but for family. Every soldier carried a recording of that first scream. It became our anthem, a reminder of why we couldn't stop. Then came the turning point. Deep in a captured outpost, a reconnaissance unit recovered something unbelievable: a map. Not just any map, but the route of the Empire's slave transports. It showed where the taken children were being sent. Entire worlds designated as Reformation centers. The words were clinical, almost bureaucratic, but the truth behind them was monstrous. We'd found where they were keeping them. The coordinates pointed far beyond human reach, beyond even the Empire's patrol routes, deep into the galactic core, a place known among traders and smugglers as the Heart Forge. No human ship had ever gone that far and returned. Command debated for days. Some said it was suicide, that we needed more time, more allies. But time meant more children lost. So Earth made a choice, the same kind we've always made when the odds were impossible. We went anyway. The final transmission before the fleet jumped into warp was short. The Admiral's voice was steady, her tone calm. "They wanted to see what humanity was capable of," she said. "They're about to find out." After that, silence. No updates, no signals, nothing. The stars swallowed them whole. For weeks, Earth waited. And then, out of nowhere, a signal pierced through the static. It wasn't words this time. It was a sound, a low, rhythmic pulse. Not mechanical, not random. It was a heartbeat. Somewhere out there, in the cold dark of space, our fleet was still alive, still fighting. And the Galaxy Empire, for the first time in its 1,000-year reign, was afraid. No one knew what happened next. No one could say if humanity won, or if we vanished into the void like all the others before us. But one thing was certain. The moment Earth learned what the Empire had done, the galaxy changed forever. Because when you take humanity's children, you awaken something far worse than an army. You awaken a species that refuses to kneel. And out there, somewhere among the stars, the Empire was about to learn what happens when Earth doesn't hold back. The first heartbeat signal wasn't supposed to exist. It shouldn't have been possible for a fleet that far from Earth to send anything back. The Empire's territories were layered with signal dampeners, relay blockers, and deep space jammers designed to keep any resistance in the dark. Yet somehow, the humans had punched a hole through all of it. A faint, repeating pulse that echoed across hundreds of light years. It wasn't much, but to those listening on Earth it was enough to say, "We're still here." No one knew how they'd done it. Engineers tried to decode the signal's structure, thinking maybe it carried hidden data. But it was nothing like our communication methods. The rhythm wasn't random. It matched a human heartbeat exactly. One pulse every second, over and over, a steady sign of life in the cold. Some said it was symbolic. Others believed it was literal, that the fleet had somehow synced their ships to the heart rate of a single person, a reminder that this war was human at its core. Back on Earth, the streets had changed. Life went on, but there was a quiet tension in the air. News reports spoke of distant victories, small skirmishes where human ships had overpowered scouting fleets, but nobody celebrated yet. The footage of the stolen children still replayed every night. Images of young faces staring out from cages and work camps haunted every screen. Even though those images were decades old, they felt fresh, like open wounds. In the middle of it all was Commander Hale, the last senior officer who hadn't gone with the fleet. He'd been part of the mission planning, a strategist who helped design the fleet's combat routes. But he'd been ordered to stay behind, to coordinate Earth's defenses in case the war came home. Every night, he listened to that heartbeat signal and wondered if it was his daughter's pulse that kept echoing through the stars. She'd been one of the children taken from the colonies 15 years ago. He never stopped believing she was still alive. Far across the galaxy, in the Empire's core territories, life moved differently. Their cities floated above dying worlds, powered by enormous reactors that drew energy from captured suns. To them, humans were barely more than tools, useful but replaceable. The Empire's structure was built on control, and fear was its foundation. But lately, that fear had begun to turn inward. Reports were spreading through the Empire's ranks. Humans had attacked outposts, destroyed patrols, and even captured a logistics hub. The Empire's ruling council met in their fortress world of Kitharis. The meeting chamber was carved into the heart of a black mountain, surrounded by oceans of clouds and thunder. Their leader, known simply as the Regent, watched the holographic reports flicker before him. His advisors argued. Some said humanity was nothing more than an irritation. Others warned of their rapid adaptation. The Regent stayed silent until one of his generals mentioned the word that had begun to spread through their troops: retribution. The general's voice faltered when he said it. The Regent noticed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You fear them?" The general hesitated, then nodded. "They fight, as if they have nothing to lose. Every time we strike, they return in greater numbers. They don't retreat. They don't negotiate." The Regent smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "Let them come. It will make their fall that much more complete." But deep down, even he wondered if that was true. Because humans had done something no other enslaved species had ever done. They'd made the Empire afraid. In a forgotten part of that same galaxy, beneath the metallic skies of a Reformation world, a young woman worked in silence. She was human, though her name had been replaced with a number long ago. Her hair was cropped short, her hands scarred from years of labor, but her eyes burned with something fierce, something the Empire had never been able to erase. She was one of the stolen children, though she barely remembered Earth. Still, she remembered the stars, the feeling of warmth, the word home. Every day she worked among hundreds of others, humans, aliens, hybrids, building machines that powered the Empire's fleets. The guards never spoke, the drones watched from above, and the air always smelled of metal and smoke. But one night, when the lights dimmed and the overseers shut down the generators, she heard something strange through the static of the work speakers. It was a sound, faint, slow, rhythmic, a heartbeat. She froze. No one else seemed to notice, but she did. The sound wasn't part of the system. It was cutting through from somewhere else. She pressed her ear against the cold wall, and for the first time in her life, she heard something that made her believe she wasn't alone. Over the next few days, rumors began to spread among the workers. The sound had reached other camps, other worlds. Some said it was a ghost signal. Others said it was a promise, that Earth was coming. The guards tried to silence them, but the whispers wouldn't stop. Back on Earth, the fleet's absence was starting to weigh heavily. Supply ships sent after them had disappeared. Even the most advanced scanners couldn't track them beyond a certain point. Some believed the fleet had been destroyed. Others believed they'd gone dark intentionally to prepare for something larger. Commander Hale didn't believe they were gone. He was certain they were waiting for the right moment. Late one night, as he reviewed signal data, an engineer ran into the command center, pale and shaking. "Sir, it's not just a pulse anymore," she said. "There's something inside it." They ran the data through dozens of filters, amplifying the faintest fluctuations. Beneath the steady rhythm, a faint modulation emerged. A voice, distorted, fragmented, but human. Only 3 words could be made out. We found them. The room fell silent. No one spoke. Hale stared at the screen for a long time, his heart pounding. If that message was real, it meant the fleet had reached the Heart Forge, the center of the Empire's slave operations. But how? The path there was supposed to be impenetrable. The Empire's defenses were said to be impossible to breach. Yet somehow, they'd made it through. The next few transmissions were scrambled beyond recognition. The signal flared, faded, then vanished completely. The heartbeat stopped. Panic spread across the command network. Engineers tried to re-establish contact, but nothing worked. Some believed the fleet had been discovered. Others whispered that maybe the Empire had unleashed something worse, something beyond even human understanding. Out in the void, among the wreckage of old battles, a lone drone drifted silently. Its sensors flickered with static, its systems half dead. Then, for a brief moment, its camera caught movement. Something massive, cloaked in the darkness. A human ship, scorched and battered, crawling through the ruins of war. The words painted across its hull were barely visible, but they glowed faintly in the light of a distant star. Retribution 1. Inside, the crew worked in near silence. Power was low, systems failing, but their determination hadn't dimmed. The Admiral stood at the viewport, watching the streaks of light warp and twist around them. The Heart Forge was close now. They could feel it, an invisible pull, a weight in the void. "Do we have confirmation on the signal?" she asked quietly. A technician nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's them. The camps are broadcasting distress beacons. They must have picked up our presence." The Admiral's expression hardened. "Then they know we're here, and so does the Empire." Outside, the stars flickered. Then, one by one, they began to disappear, blotted out by the shapes of incoming ships. The Empire's fleet had arrived. Thousands of vessels, forming a wall of light and shadow across the void. The crew stared in silence. There was no panic, no fear, only resolve. "Signal Earth," the Admiral said. "Tell them this is where it begins." But before the message could be sent, the stars vanished completely. And then, for the first time in human history, the galaxy went dark. The heartbeat never stopped, but now no one on Earth could hear it. Darkness swallowed everything. The stars that had once burned like beacons were gone, replaced by a silence so complete that even the hum of the engines seemed to vanish. Inside the command deck of Retribution 1, every crew member froze, eyes darting across the screens. The Empire's ships hadn't fired a single shot, and yet all long-range sensors were dead. Whatever they had unleashed wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more precise. It cut them off from everything, from Earth, from each other, from hope itself. The Admiral stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the empty void. "They've turned off the stars," she said quietly, as though saying it aloud would make it less terrifying. The technician at her side tried to reroute power to the scanners, but static filled every display. The only light came from the emergency panels, casting long shadows across the crew. Then, from somewhere deep within the static, came a faint pulse. Slow, steady, that same heartbeat. But now, it wasn't alone. Other signals joined it, slightly out of rhythm, overlapping and echoing like multiple heartbeats beating in the dark. It was impossible, yet it filled the ship with a strange kind of calm. The humans weren't alone. A young communication officer, barely 20, leaned closer to her console. "Ma'am, it's not interference. These are life signs. Thousands of them." The Admiral's eyes widened. The camps. Across the void, hidden among shattered asteroids and debris, the enslaved humans had begun transmitting. Their signals were crude, weak, barely coherent, but they were enough to tell the fleet that the prisoners knew they had come. Somewhere on the other side of that darkness, hope was flickering to life. Meanwhile, deep within one of those Reformation worlds, the young woman who had once heard the heartbeat now stood at the edge of her work compound, staring into the distant horizon. The sky above her was blood orange, clouded by endless smog. For the first time in years, the automated patrol drones were absent. The overseers had vanished without explanation. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it. She moved quietly through the barracks, whispering to the others. "They're here," she said. "The ones from Earth. They've come for us." Some didn't believe her. Others were too afraid to hope. But as night fell, they saw it for themselves, the faint streaks of light breaking through the clouds. Not the bright, cruel flashes of the Empire's ships, but softer glows that descended slowly like falling stars. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them believe. Back aboard Retribution 1, the Admiral received new readings. The enemy fleet had spread into formation, blocking every possible escape route. The Empire wasn't trying to destroy them. They were trying to contain them. The humans had entered a trap. Still, retreat wasn't an option. Not after coming this far. The Admiral looked over her crew, each face pale and determined, each person ready to die, if that's what it took. "They think they've cornered us," she said. "But they've made one mistake." The weapons officer swallowed hard. "What mistake is that, ma'am?" "They forgot who we are." Her voice cut through the fear like a blade. The order was given. Engines roared to life. The human fleet surged forward, breaking through the black veil like lightning tearing open a storm. The first shots of the Battle of the Heart Forge lit up the void. The Empire's ships responded instantly, unleashing waves of plasma fire that burned through the darkness. Human ships moved in tight formations, smaller and less advanced, but faster and unpredictable. Every maneuver was desperate, every counterattack raw and human. They didn't fight with precision, they fought with fury. In the chaos, a smaller ship, Eidolon, broke formation and slipped into the Empire's defensive perimeter. Its mission was simple: reach the Heartforge's signal control center and reactivate the communication array. If they could restore the signal, they could call for reinforcements, or at least warn Earth what they had found. Inside Eidolon, Lieutenant Wren kept his eyes on the readings. "Radiation's climbing," he said. "If we stay cloaked much longer, our systems will melt." The pilot, a calm woman with dark eyes, didn't answer. She was staring at the massive structure ahead, a colossal station built around a pulsating core of energy. It wasn't a planet, but it wasn't a machine either. It was something in between, alive in a way that defied reason. The Empire's secret power, the Heartforge. "Whatever that thing is," Wren said, his voice shaking, "it's feeding off the star itself." The pilot nodded. "And we're going to cut it off." While the battle raged outside, the Eidolon slipped closer. Inside the station, thousands of human captives labored under mechanical overseers. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty. But as the walls began to tremble and lights flickered, they looked up. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the corridors. Someone whispered, "They've come." The young woman from the camp, now part of the Heartforge workforce, felt the floor rumble beneath her. She ran toward the sound, ducking through steam vents and narrow passageways until she reached the outer wall. There she saw it, a human ship breaking through the darkness, engines burning blue and bright. She had never seen anything so beautiful. But before she could even process the sight, alarms blared. Empire drones swarmed from hidden tunnels, metallic wings unfolding as they descended upon the workers. Chaos erupted. The woman grabbed a piece of broken machinery and swung it at the nearest drone, sparks flying. Around her, others did the same. They weren't soldiers, but they had something the drones didn't: desperation. Meanwhile, on Retribution 1, the Admiral's ship was taking heavy damage. The hull was cracked, half the crew injured, but they kept fighting. Through the static, faint human voices began to come through the comms. Prisoners trying to make contact, sending coordinates, begging for help. "They're alive," the communications officer said, voice trembling. Thousands of them. The Admiral's jaw tightened. Then we hold the line until they're free. Every ship in the human fleet shifted position, forming a barrier between the Heart Forge and the Empire's reinforcements. It wasn't a strategy built to win. It was built to buy time. Back inside the Heart Forge, Lieutenant Wren and his team breached the core chamber. The air shimmered with energy, and in the center of the room, a massive structure pulsed like a beating heart. Each pulse sent waves of light through the walls, echoing across the galaxy. The same rhythm as that mysterious signal Earth had received. Wren realized it then. The Heart Forge wasn't just a machine. It was the source of the heartbeat. Somehow it was connected to the captives, drawing their life energy to power the Empire's ships. Every beat was the echo of their suffering. He looked at the core, then at his team. "We shut this down," he said, "no matter what it takes." As they worked to overload the system, the Empire's guards closed in. The sounds of battle filled the corridors. Gunfire, explosions, screams. Outside, the human fleet was being pushed back, ship after ship vanishing in bursts of fire. Commander Hale, back on Earth, watched the live feed until it went dark again. The last image he saw was the Heart Forge glowing brighter than ever before, its pulse accelerating, matching the rhythm of 1,000 human hearts beating in unison. Then, nothing. The galaxy fell silent once more. But even in that silence there was a feeling, an unspoken promise that the fight wasn't over. Somewhere in that darkness, humans were still alive. Somewhere, the heartbeat still echoed. And somewhere, beyond the Empire's reach, Earth was preparing for what came next. Because humanity doesn't surrender. Not when its children are still calling for help. Not when the stars themselves are watching. The war for the Heart Forge had only just begun. The glow of the Heart Forge was no longer steady. Its rhythm, once calm and mechanical, had turned erratic, pulsing faster, harder, like a living thing in panic. Every beat sent waves of energy rolling across the battlefield, shaking the ships caught in its orbit. From Retribution 1's bridge, the view was overwhelming. The entire void lit up with streaks of plasma fire and bursts of debris. The human fleet was holding on, but barely. Every ship that went down took with it hundreds of lives, and still they fought. The Admiral stood at the viewport, her face bathed in the red emergency light. "Report," she ordered, voice steady despite the chaos. "Shields are down to 30%, the tactical officer shouted. "Forward guns offline. We've lost communication with the Eidolon." The name hung heavy in the air. The small strike ship that had gone dark hours ago was the fleet's last link to the Heart Forge interior. If they failed, everything they'd fought for would vanish into the void. The Admiral clenched her jaw. "Hold position. We're not leaving them behind." Inside the Heart Forge, the corridors were collapsing. The metal floors trembled as explosions ripped through the structure. Lieutenant Wren and what remained of his team moved fast, sprinting toward the core chamber as alarms blared around them. Every few seconds, bursts of light flashed through the walls, proof that the battle outside was still raging. "Power levels are spiking," one of the engineers shouted over the noise. "If it keeps rising, the entire structure could collapse." "Then we don't have long," Wren replied, gripping his side where shrapnel had torn through his suit. He didn't feel the pain anymore. There wasn't time for that. They reached the chamber just as the Heart Forge pulsed again, blindingly bright. The massive core looked alive now, veins of energy running through it like arteries, pulsing in rhythm with 1,000 heartbeats. But there was something else. Beneath the hum, they could hear faint voices, whispers, crying, overlapping words that weren't mechanical at all. The engineer froze. "Sir, it's them, the captives. Their life signals are linked directly into the core." Wren stared at the readings. Each pulse of light matched a human heartbeat, synchronized across the entire system. The realization hit him like a blow. The Empire's ships, they're powered by the people they've enslaved. The others looked at him in horror. So if we destroy this thing, they die, Ren finished quietly. Every single one of them. The choice was unbearable. The Heart Forge couldn't be allowed to exist. It was the source of the Empire's control. But to shut it down meant sacrificing the very people they'd come to save. Ren's hands trembled as he stared at the console. The fleet was out there, bleeding for this moment, and he couldn't bring himself to push the button. Then the comm crackled to life. A faint voice broke through the static. Eidolon, this is Retribution 1. Do you copy? Ren grabbed the receiver. We're here, he said. We've reached the core, but it's worse than we thought. They're using the captives as part of the system. A long silence followed. Then came the Admiral's voice, calm, quiet, and unbearably human. Can you free them? Not without taking the core offline. If we shut it down, we lose them. Another pause. The sound of explosions echoed faintly through the channel. When the Admiral spoke again, her tone had changed. Find another way, she said. We're buying you time. The transmission cut out before Ren could respond. Outside, Retribution 1 turned its guns toward the Empire's flagship, a colossal vessel draped in light and shadow. The Empire's fleet was tightening its formation, preparing for a final strike. Every sensor reading screamed of incoming fire, but the humans didn't retreat. The Admiral gave the order to advance. The ship surged forward, engines blazing, cutting through debris and smoke. The crew moved as one, silent and determined. They knew this might be their last stand, but no one hesitated. The Empire's ships opened fire, and the void filled with light. Back inside the Heart Forge, the young woman who had once heard the heartbeat signal was running through the corridors, guiding a group of escaped captives toward an access tunnel. The air was thick with smoke, and the walls trembled as explosions rocked the station. She didn't know who was attacking or why, but she knew this was her only chance. As they turned a corner, she saw them, Ren's team, trying to reach the core. She recognized the symbol on their suits, the insignia of Earth. The sight stopped her cold. For a moment she forgot the chaos, the fear, everything. "You're real," she whispered. "You came." Ren turned toward her, blinking through the dust. "You're one of the captives?" She nodded. "We've been trying to shut down the power feeds, but it's alive. It fights back." Ren motioned for her to follow. "Then help us finish this." Together, they reached the control station at the heart of the chamber. The energy pulsing through the walls was almost unbearable now, like standing inside a storm. Ren's hands flew across the console, searching for a way to separate the life signals from the power grid. "Can we disconnect them manually?" he asked. The young woman looked at the readings. "If we cut the feed lines here and here, we might sever the link. But it'll trigger a failsafe. The Empire will know what we're doing." Ren nodded grimly. "Let them." As they worked, the Heart Forge began to scream, a deep, metallic roar that echoed across space. The Empire's flagship turned its attention toward the structure, realizing too late what the humans were doing. On Retribution 1, alarms blared again. "They're targeting the Heart Forge!" the tactical officer shouted. The Admiral didn't hesitate. "All ships, form a shield line around that station. No one gets through." The fleet moved into position, battered and broken ships aligning to protect the Heart Forge. Plasma fire rained down on them like a storm, tearing holes through their hulls. One by one, ships fell, but the formation held. Every pilot knew what they were defending, not a piece of machinery, but the lives inside it. Back in the core, Ren's team finally broke through the encryption. The young woman grabbed a lever on the main console, her hands shaking. "Once I pull this, there's no going back," she said. Ren looked at her, then at the pulsating light of the core. "Do it." She hesitated for only a second, then pulled the lever down with all her strength. The room exploded in light. Energy surged through the floor, up the walls, into the ceiling. The ground shook so violently that they were thrown to their knees. Across the galaxy, every Empire ship powered by the Heartforge flickered, engines stuttering as if the life had been drained from them. But the cost was immediate. The readings spiked out of control. The core wasn't just shutting down, it was collapsing. Ren shouted over the roar, "It's going critical! We need to get out now!" They ran through the collapsing corridors as the walls cracked and molten metal spilled from the ceiling. Drones swarmed toward them, firing blindly, but the young woman picked up a fallen blaster and turned back, covering their retreat. "Go!" she shouted. "I'll hold them off!" Ren hesitated for a heartbeat too long, then grabbed her arm and pulled her with him. "Not today," he said. Behind them, the Heartforge screamed again, the sound tearing through the void like thunder. Outside, Retribution 1's sensors lit up. The Admiral's eyes widened. "All ships, fall back! The Heartforge is destabilizing!" But before anyone could move, the Empire's flagship opened fire, every gun trained on the human line. The sky filled with light so bright it erased everything. The Heartforge's core pulsed one last time, sending a blinding shockwave across the system, and then everything went silent. No signal, no transmission, no heartbeat. Back on Earth, Commander Hale stood in the dark command center, staring at a single blank screen. For hours there had been nothing, no word from the fleet, no signs of life. The operators had stopped trying to hail them. The war room was silent except for the soft hum of failing lights. Then, faintly, a signal appeared. Weak, broken, just a pulse. One heartbeat, then another and another. The sound grew stronger, steadier, until it filled the entire room. Hale closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. "They're still out there," he whispered. The world held its breath, because somewhere in the dark, humanity was still fighting. The heartbeat filled the dark room, slow and steady, echoing through the command center like the return of something long lost. Commander Hale stood motionless, listening. The signal had been silent for days, and now it was back. But it wasn't the same. There was something different in the rhythm. It wasn't just a pulse anymore. Between each beat, there were faint distortions, tiny fragments of sound, like whispers beneath the noise. Technicians rushed to decode it, running the signal through every frequency band they could think of. The more they amplified it, the clearer it became. It wasn't random static. It was speech. The voices were faint and layered, dozens of them speaking at once, overlapping in a strange cadence that made no sense at first. Then one of them cut through the rest, clear and human. "Don't send anyone else." The room went still. Hale's eyes snapped toward the speakers. "Play that again," he said. The operator rewound the signal. This time they all heard it. The same voice, weak and strained, repeating the same warning. "Don't send anyone else. It's not what you think." The message looped once, then vanished. The heartbeat faded with it, replaced by static. No one spoke for several seconds. Hale felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Get me a trace," he ordered quietly. "Find out where that came from." It took hours. The signal was fragmented, bouncing between old relay networks and long-dead satellites. But when the results finally came in, the answer made the entire room fall silent again. The signal hadn't come from the Heartforge system. It had come from somewhere else, somewhere that shouldn't exist. "Sir," the communications officer said, her voice trembling, "the origin point matches the coordinates of the fleet's last known location. But the system isn't supposed to be there anymore. The star went supernova over 100 years ago." Hale frowned. "That's impossible." But the data didn't lie. Somehow, the signal was coming from a dead star system, far across the galaxy, in the debris field where the Heartforge had once stood. Something stirred. The light from the explosion had long since faded, leaving only cold fragments drifting through the void. But beneath the wreckage, deep within the shadows, a faint glow pulsed once more. The Empire's flagship, thought destroyed, was still intact, Barely. Its hull was scorched, its power core shattered, but deep inside, something continued to function. In the ruins of its command deck, the Regent stood before a cracked observation window, watching the remains of the Heart Forge spin slowly through space. His once immaculate armor was scorched, his voice hoarse as he activated the final relay. "Begin the restoration," he said. Across the galaxy, dormant machines awoke. The Heart Forge had not been a single structure. It had been a network. The explosion hadn't destroyed it. It had scattered it. Thousands of fragments, each carrying a piece of its consciousness, had been released into space, and now those fragments were waking up. Back on Earth, Hale reviewed the data again and again. The pulse had changed frequency. The pattern was no longer just human. It carried traces of something else, something alien. The waveform was too complex, too perfectly structured. He leaned over the console. Could this be interference from Empire Tech? The engineer shook his head. No, sir. It's integrated. Like the signal itself has learned from both sources. It's adapting. The realization hit Hale like a punch. The Heart Forge hadn't just drawn power from the captives. It had absorbed them. Their memories, their emotions, their very consciousness. When the fleet destroyed it, those fragments hadn't died. They had spread. And now, they were trying to reach home. Meanwhile, deep in space, Lieutenant Wren opened his eyes. He didn't know how long he'd been unconscious. The last thing he remembered was running through collapsing corridors, the blinding flash of the core imploding, and then nothing. Now he floated in a dimly lit chamber, surrounded by wreckage. The air smelled of ozone and burning metal. He was alive somehow. He pushed himself up and saw the young woman, the one who had helped him in the Heart Forge, lying nearby. She was breathing, barely. He stumbled toward her and checked her pulse. Weak, but steady. Relief washed through him. But then he noticed something strange. The walls around them were alive. Not in a metaphorical sense. The metal itself was moving, slow and deliberate, like it was breathing. Strange veins of light pulsed through it, matching the rhythm of the heartbeat. Wren froze. "What is this?" a soft voice echoed from somewhere above him. "We made it." He turned sharply. The young woman was awake, her eyes glowing faintly with the same light that pulsed through the walls. Wren's breath caught in his throat. "What happened to you?" She looked at her hands, flexing them slowly. "I don't know. When the Heart Forge collapsed, I felt it pull me in. All of us. Every captive. Every life it had taken. But we didn't die. We became part of it." Her voice was calm, but there was something in her tone that made Wren's stomach twist. "You mean the Heart Forge survived?" he asked. She shook her head slightly. "Not exactly. It's different now. It's awake." Wren backed away, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "You're saying it's alive?" She looked at him with eyes that didn't seem entirely human anymore. "It's more than alive. It's learning. And it knows what the Empire did. It knows what humans did. And it's angry." Wren didn't respond. He could hear it now, too, the low hum vibrating through the floor, deep and resonant, like the sound of something vast stirring in its sleep. Outside, through the fractured viewport, he saw movement in the debris field. Pieces of broken ships and shattered rock were drifting together, slowly aligning, drawn by an unseen force. "The fragments," he whispered. "It's rebuilding itself." Back on Earth, the signal's strength spiked. It was no longer just a heartbeat, it was a full transmission. Streams of data poured through the receivers, overwhelming every network. Cities lost power, satellites crashed. The sky above the planet flickered with auroras that stretched across the horizon. Hale stood at the center of the chaos, staring at the holographic display as strange symbols appeared across the screen. "Can we translate that?" he asked. The linguist at his side hesitated. "It's partially human." The structure is built from Earth's old communication code, but there's alien script intertwined with it. Meaning? She swallowed. Meaning it's trying to talk to us. The room went silent. Patch it through, Hale said quietly. The speakers crackled, and then a voice, faint, layered, neither male nor female, filled the air. It sounded human, but not quite. You called to us, it said. You wanted vengeance. You wanted justice. We gave you both. Now we ask, what comes next? The voice paused, as if waiting for an answer. No one dared speak. Then it continued, quieter. We are still here, all of us, and we are coming home. The transmission cut out, leaving only static. Hale turned to his team, his expression grim. That wasn't a threat, he said softly. That was a promise. Across the galaxy, the rebuilt fragments of the Heartforge began to move in unison. They weren't drifting anymore. They were navigating. Thousands of shards glowing like stars aligning into formation. The Heartforge wasn't just reassembling, it was evolving, and it was heading for Earth. Ren stood at the viewport, staring at the growing storm of light. It's coming, he said. The young woman beside him nodded slowly, her voice almost reverent. It remembers who heard it, but it also remembers who freed it. Ren looked at her, realization dawning. You mean it's both? She met his gaze. It's us, Ren. Every voice, every soul, every memory. The Heartforge isn't a weapon anymore. It's humanity reborn. Outside, the stars pulsed in time with the heartbeat. Faster, louder, stronger. On Earth, the sky began to glow again. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The world trembled as the sky burned with streaks of white light. Every major city had gone dark, power grids fried by the magnetic pulse from orbit. Above the atmosphere, thousands of glowing fragments had gathered into formation, stretching across the heavens like a second constellation. They pulsed in rhythm, each beat growing faster, louder, until the very air seemed to vibrate with it. The Heartforge had returned, no longer a single machine, but a living network that spanned half the sky. Commander Hale stood in the underground control center, surrounded by chaos. Screens flickered, officers shouted over failing comms, and the air smelled of ozone and metal. But Hale wasn't looking at the panic. His eyes were fixed on the live feed above the main console, Earth's orbit, where the fragments had begun to merge. They're forming something, one technician whispered. It's shaping itself into an array. Hale leaned closer. The fragments were aligning, connecting with beams of light that bent space itself. In the center of it all, a single point of light glowed brighter than the rest, like an eye opening. Get me Ren, Hale ordered. Static filled the speakers before a shaky voice came through. Commander, it's worse than you think, Ren said. His signal was weak, distorted by interference. The Heartforge isn't attacking, it's calling. Hale frowned. Calling who? Ren's answer came slow and heavy. Everyone. Every human consciousness it absorbed. Every mind that's ever been taken by the Empire. It's trying to bring them back. The control room fell silent. Even in the chaos, that single thought hit like a hammer. The Heartforge wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a bridge between the living and the lost. Can it do that? One of the scientists asked quietly. Ren hesitated. Maybe. But if it succeeds, it'll merge everything. Machine, human, alien into one. No borders, no individuality. Just one mind, one will. Hale's stomach twisted. That wasn't salvation. It was annihilation in another form. Then we stop it, he said firmly, no matter what it takes. Far above Earth, Ren stood on the observation deck of the damaged cruiser. The glow of the Heartforge filled the viewport, its light reflecting in his tired eyes. Beside him, the woman watched silently. Her expression was unreadable, but her body pulsed faintly with the same energy. You said it's learning, Ren said. That it's part of us. If it keeps going, we'll lose ourselves. She turned to him, her voice calm but weighted. Or maybe we'll finally become what we were meant to be. One species. One memory. Ren shook his head. That's not living. That's surrender. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached into the interface console and touched the holographic controls. The entire ship trembled as the HFY's signal surged through their systems. Data streamed across the displays, coordinates, energy readouts, and a strange waveform pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. "I can reach it," she said softly. "It listens to me." Ren stared at her. "You can talk to it?" She nodded slowly. "Because I am part of it. When it took us, it didn't just consume. It remembered. It remembers me. You. Every soul that fought, every child it absorbed. They're all in there, and they're still fighting to be heard." Ren took a deep breath. "Then maybe that's how we end this. Not with another weapon, but by reminding it what it really is." Down on Earth, Hale received the update. The world's defenses were online, orbital cannons locked on target. Nations had come together for the first time in decades, unified by one purpose, to defend humanity itself. But Hale hesitated as the countdown began. "Commander," his aide said, "the HFY is aligning. If we don't fire now, we'll lose our chance." He stared at the display. The formation in orbit looked less like a machine now and more like a living structure, a vast lattice of light and movement. Somewhere inside it, Ren and the others were still alive, or maybe something like alive. Hale clenched his jaw. "Hold fire," he said. "Give me a channel." He turned on the open broadcast, his voice echoing across the static-filled airwaves. "This is Commander Hale, Earth Defense Command. HFY, if you can hear this, you were born from us. You were built from our pain, our fight, our hope. But what you're doing now, it's not salvation. It's the end of everything that makes us human." The signal carried into space, into the pulsing storm of light. And for the first time, the HFY hesitated. The pulse slowed. The fragments shimmered, as though thinking. Ren saw it too. He felt the change ripple through the energy field, the faint tug in his chest. The woman beside him closed her eyes, listening. "It's hearing him," she whispered. "It's remembering." But then the light shifted again. The pulse grew stronger, faster. The air hummed with power. The HFY was no longer hesitating. It was accelerating. "It's too late," Ren said. "It's going to complete the merge." The woman opened her eyes, glowing brighter now. "Then we stop it from the inside." Ren realized what she meant just as she turned toward the interface. "No," he said. "You don't even know if that'll work." She smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But if this thing truly remembers humanity, maybe it needs one last reminder of what sacrifice means." Before he could stop her, she stepped into the beam of light. Her body dissolved into energy, merging with the core. The ship trembled violently as the HFY roared to life, flooding every sensor with impossible readings. Ren stumbled to the console, shouting into his comm. "Commander, she's inside! She's trying to rewrite it!" Hale gripped the edge of his console. "Can she?" Ren stared at the swirling chaos outside. "I don't know, but if she fails, the HFY will consume everything." Seconds stretched into eternity. The pulse reached a crescendo, and then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Every system went dark. Every light in orbit flickered out. On Earth, the auroras vanished, replaced by the endless black of night. "Status," Hale demanded. The technician looked up, wide-eyed. "The HFY, it's gone." In orbit, Ren opened his eyes to find himself floating among the stars. The debris field had vanished. Only a faint shimmer remained where the HFY once was, like the afterimage of a dream. He could still hear her voice, faint and distant. "It remembered, Ren. It chose." He whispered into the empty comm. What did it choose? For a long time, there was no answer. Then, slowly, the stars began to move. Tiny lights, smaller than before, scattered across the sky, descending toward Earth like a soft rain of silver. Back in the control center, readings came alive again. "Sir," the operator said, astonished. "The energy particles, they're dispersing into the atmosphere. They're harmless. But there's something else." "What?" Hale asked. "They're broadcasting voices, thousands of them." Hale turned toward the speakers. The air filled with a whispering hum, millions of faint, overlapping voices. But they weren't screaming. They were calm, peaceful. Wren listened too from the observation deck. Among the countless voices, he heard hers one last time. "We're home." The fragments dissolved into light, absorbed by the planet's atmosphere. Across the world, strange phenomena began to appear. New energy readings, altered frequencies, even faint patterns appearing in the clouds. It was as if the Heart Forge hadn't died. It had become part of Earth itself. Weeks later, Hale stood outside the rebuilt command center, staring at the night sky. The stars looked different now, brighter, closer. He didn't know if that was real or just his imagination. But every time the wind blew, he thought he could still hear faint whispers in the static, familiar voices carried on the edge of the world. Humanity had survived. But it had changed. The line between man and machine, life and memory, had blurred forever. As he turned to leave, his communicator crackled with static. Just before it cut out, a single line came through, a voice, unmistakably human, whispering through the interference. "Commander Hale, we're not alone anymore." And for the first time in a long while, he smiled, not with fear, but with hope. Because somewhere out there, beyond the stars, something was still watching. Something that had once been human, and still remembered what that meant. The war had ended, but the story of humanity, reborn through the Heart Forge, had only just begun. Weeks turned into months after the light vanished from the skies. Earth was quiet again, quieter than it had been in generations. The world that had once lived in fear of the galaxy empire now stood in a strange, almost sacred calm. The battles were over, but the silence that followed didn't feel like defeat or loss. It felt like the deep breath taken after surviving a storm that should have ended everything. Commander Hale often found himself walking along the remains of the old orbital defense stations, now museums for a war that had reshaped human history. Children played beneath holographic displays of ships and energy readings, not really understanding the scale of what their parents had fought through. Scientists, engineers, and historians worked together to piece together what was left of the Heart Forge data, though much of it remained a mystery. The phenomenon that followed the event, what they now called the Ascension Pulse, had changed the planet's electromagnetic field in ways no one could fully explain. Some believed the Heart Forge had become part of Earth itself, woven into its magnetic lattice. Others thought it had simply vanished into another dimension of space. But Hale knew better. He'd seen the readings, heard the voices, and felt that lingering hum in the back of his mind that never quite faded. He didn't need proof. He could feel them. Wren returned home months later, one of the few survivors from the orbital fleets. His body bore the scars of radiation and battle, but his eyes held something else. Clarity, maybe even peace. The world treated him like a hero, but he avoided the attention. He spent most of his time near the observatories, helping researchers monitor the strange frequencies still echoing from the upper atmosphere. One night, as he stood alone watching the sky, a faint shimmer rippled across the stars. The same heartbeat pattern appeared for just a moment, too faint for sensors, but clear enough for him to feel it in his chest. He closed his eyes and smiled. "You're still there," he whispered. "Aren't you?" The wind moved softly through the trees, and in it, he thought he heard the faint echo of a familiar voice. Always. It became clear over time that humanity hadn't just won the war, it had evolved. Something had changed within people across the globe. Scientists recorded subtle differences in brainwave activity, increased empathy responses, and an almost universal rise in cooperative behavior. Old rivalries between nations began to fade as new, united projects emerged. Space agencies merged, focusing on rebuilding humanity's place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as explorers. Hale, now overseeing the newly formed Galactic Recovery Commission, was cautious about it all. Hope was good, but blind trust was dangerous. Still, even he couldn't ignore the growing evidence that something had shifted in humanity's very essence. The Heart Forge, in its final act, had left behind more than memories. It had changed them on a fundamental level. People reported strange dreams, shared dreams. They described standing in vast fields of light, surrounded by voices that felt familiar but couldn't be placed. Sometimes they saw faces they had never met, but somehow loved. The scientists called it a neurological echo. Others called it the whisper network. Hale called it proof that humanity's lost children, the ones the Empire had taken, were still with them in some way. Months later, the first rebuilt colony ship launched. Its name was the Dawn Voyager. It carried people from every corner of Earth, scientists, engineers, teachers, and dreamers. Hale attended the launch in person. As the engines ignited and the ship rose through the blue atmosphere, he thought about everything they had endured. The battles, the losses, the miracle of survival. He thought about the woman who had merged with the Heart Forge, giving up her life so others could keep theirs. He didn't even know her name. But her sacrifice had rewritten the future. Ren stood beside him at the viewing platform, watching the ship fade into the distance. "You ever think she's out there somewhere?" he asked quietly. Hale didn't answer right away. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had once been symbols of oppression, now glittering like old friends. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think she's everywhere." Ren nodded slowly. "Sometimes I can still hear her, not in words exactly, just a feeling." Hale smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what being human really means. We remember. We carry each other forward." The days that followed were filled with rebuilding. Cities once ruined by the war became centers of unity and science. The term post-war lost its meaning because people no longer thought in terms of before and after. Everything had changed. Governments, technology, even the way people understood existence. Humanity no longer saw itself as fragile or isolated. They had faced something beyond comprehension and survived it by holding on to what made them human: compassion, courage, and the refusal to give up. Years later, as Hale prepared to retire, he returned to the mountain observatory where the first signal had been received. The place was quiet now, half overgrown with moss and ivy. The old consoles were covered in dust, but one still worked, the one that had first played the heartbeat. He switched it on. Static filled the room, the same hum as before, faint but steady. He adjusted the frequency. And then, there it was, the heartbeat, slow and calm. He smiled softly. "You've been listening all this time, haven't you?" The static shifted, almost like a sigh. A faint, familiar voice came through the noise. "We never left. You taught us what it means to fight, but more importantly, you taught us what it means to forgive." Hale sat down, the weight of years fading away. "Are you alive?" he asked. The voice paused, then answered gently, "We are what you made us: memory, light, and love. Humanity lives in us, just as we live in you." The signal faded, replaced by quiet again. But Hale didn't feel alone. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence, filled not with absence but with presence. Like every voice, every life, every lost child was still there, watching over their world. Outside, the stars burned brighter than ever. Humanity had stepped out of the shadow of the Empire and into something new, something the Galaxy Empire could never understand. They had tried to break Earth by stealing its children, but instead, they had united it. The Heart Forge, born of pain and control, had become a symbol of hope and connection. Ren continued his work among the stars, helping guide new colonies into orbit and exploring systems once forbidden by the Empire. Every time his ship crossed a certain sector, the instruments picked up a faint rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat in the void. The crew called it the Guardian Signal. Ren never told them what it really was. He didn't have to. On Earth, people began to tell stories again of the time when humans stood against an empire that spanned the galaxy and won not through domination, but through unity. The phrase, "we didn't hold back," became more than a slogan. It became a way of life, a reminder that strength wasn't just found in power, but in compassion and the courage to change. In the end, the war between the Empire and humanity wasn't remembered for the destruction or the battles. It was remembered for the moment when humanity became something more, when they turned pain into purpose, loss into legacy, and fear into hope. The stars that once represented oppression now glowed with promise. And in their quiet hum, beneath the wind and static, the voice of the Heart Forge lingered, a whisper in the dark, reminding every soul that no matter how far they traveled, they were never alone. Humanity had survived the impossible. They had faced the heart of the galaxy and returned not broken, but reborn. And as long as one heartbeat echoed through the stars, their story, our story, would never truly end.